What's up everybody, this is Donnie aka Elevated with another video on behalf of Dota Alchemy, and this is going to be an incredibly important one for all of you carry players out there, and we are going to be talking about how to lose lanes correctly. Now, the current meta in Dota is that generally the off lane is the strong lane, the safe lane is the weaker lane, and then the mid is kind of matchup and skill dependent. So that means that the off lane should win in most cases, the safe lane should lose in most cases, and the mid is going to just kind of depend. But it's really, really important if you are a carry player to understand how to lose lanes, because you can lose lanes in a way that loses you the game, or you can lose lanes in a way that actually ends up winning you the game. And this is a perfect replay to look at that. So we have an Ursa here in the safe lane, and Ursa, as most people know, is generally a very aggressive lane dominating hero. That is the most common way for Ursa to be played. However, you need to understand that sometimes you can't play the hero in the way that it is normally played, and if you do try to play in the way that it is normally played, you will probably end up losing your team the game. First of all, the Ursa shows up to lane with an Orb of Venom and not enough regen. This is mistake number one, clearly, because he's going against a Skywrath Mage and a Magnus. And if you actually think about this logically, he's never going to catch the Skywrath Mage because it's a ranged hero who's faster than him. So he can't trade with Sky, which means that Orb of Venom makes no sense. And he can't really trade with Magnus either, because Magnus also has ranged harass in the form of Shockwave, and he has a skewer to escape from Ursa every single time that Ursa tries to go on him. The good news is for this Ursa that he has the perfect support to deal with this type of lane, a Warlock. Warlock is one of the best heroes to play as a 5 against a harassed lane because he just provides almost unmatched sustain. So all this Ursa really has to do is just play less aggressive than normal, kind of get whatever farm he can get, and then just tank all of the harass with the help of the Warlock and hopefully a lot of regen. I'd love to see the Ursa pick up a magic stick so he can absorb all of the arcane bolts and shockwaves coming out from the Magnus. And then basically just treat this as if he's the offlaner, or a traditional offlaner, where you just kind of try to get as much as you can. The problems arise when the carry kind of lets their ego get the better of them and says, I'm the carry player, I'm supposed to have a good game, and so I'm going to play this game aggressively and expect my supports to help me win this lane no matter what, because that's what a carry is supposed to experience. And we can see that he has a pretty huge lack of understanding of what's actually happening in this lane when he picks up these boots, because he already is unable to trade harass as an Ursa when he's facing a ranged hero and a Magnus, and he's continuing to commit to that style of play by picking up these boots. He still thinks that he can chase them down and trade hits with the Fury Swipes. Obviously, that's not what's happening. I'd love to see him have a magic stick here, but instead he picks up the boots. And it's the carry's job to recognize what's going on and adapt their play. The support in this lane should be pulling, stacking and pulling, basically trying to win the experience battle because they can't win the harass and kill battle in this lane. And we can see that the Warlock, which is actually me in this game, is doing that. Stacking the small camp, setting up to pull next, providing heals where possible, and basically just trying to play this lane in a slower, less aggressive style. However, because this Ursa doesn't understand that that is how this lane needs to be played, he's basically just burning through all of his regen, and in fact, he's even causing the Warlock to miss the pull, which means that the enemy team is getting even more farm than they should. And Ursa, of course, dies again, but that's not even that important, because the death is basically just a side effect of a misunderstanding of how to play this game. And I think, to be honest, at this point, even 2 minutes into the game, instead of buying more regen and coming back to this lane, I would consider even just buying a Stout Shield and a Quelling Blade and going and jungling. I know it's only 2 minutes into the game, but if you continue to come back into this lane, you're going to basically just continue to feed the enemy team and play into their hands. This lane by Dire is built to shut down the Ursa. It's built to trade better than him and is built to frustrate him. And if he could just avoid playing into that, then it would completely waste this lane and how strong it is. And that's what I mean when I say you need to learn to lose games correctly. Instead of trying to outskill a lane that is built to counter you, which is nearly impossible, this Ursa can simply avoid the matchup entirely by going to the jungle and getting completely free farm. He will not be contested. He will get just as much farm as he would sitting in this lane. He'll probably get more, actually, because he won't have to spend so much time getting harassed and trying to trade. And he will open up the lane to then give all of its experience to one of the very experience-hungry supports in Warlock or Phoenix. He could call the Phoenix down here. The Warlock could just sit down here and get all of the experience. It doesn't really matter either way, but you'd end up getting kind of a 2-for-1 trade by allowing the Ursa to both free farm and get experience, and also allow the support to get experience as well. And we can see here that in the top lane, this is obviously the weaker lane for the Dire side. It's sort of like a mirror matchup, right? The Dire off lane is out harassing the Radiant safe lane, and the Radiant off lane is out harassing the Dire safe lane. So something's got to give pretty soon. And that what generally happens in pubs is that one of the supports makes a really big mistake. And the mistake is kind of twofold. I think probably the Warlock, aka me, should probably rotate to the top lane, because then you are tri-laning into a weaker dual lane. So you're basically adding even more wood to the fire. You're pressuring the anti-mage even more. And the Ursa just continues to get solo experience down here in the bottom lane, or just leaves the lane and jungles, and you kind of just sacrifice this lane entirely. And it's really not that big of a deal if you lose one lane, as long as you're winning the other two. So I think the Warlock probably should go to the top lane, and most importantly, this Phoenix, who's going to die here, should not come to the bottom lane. But part of the issue here is that this Ursa is continuing to play aggressively in this lane, which is almost forcing the Warlock to stay in the lane. And I think, to be honest, the Warlock, should probably have just left the lane and allowed this Ursa to just relentlessly feed, because staying here is almost just encouraging him to be a moron. But really, if the Ursa just leaves the lane, then he frees up the Warlock to leave. The Warlock can go top. The Warlock, Phoenix, and Wraith can pressure the anti-mage. And the Magnus and Skywrath have almost no ability to pressure the tower. So even if there's nobody in this bottom lane at all, you're probably not even going to lose the tower for another 5 minutes. And another major issue with this Ursa continuing to be stubborn about laning in this bad lane is that he's going to allow an opportunity for this Phoenix to make a really, really big mistake, which is to TP into this already losing lane. We've already talked about the strength of the lanes, and we've talked a little bit about how if the Warlock were to rotate to the top lane and sacrifice the Ursa, that it would be adding extra strength to a lane that is already strong, which would then empower that strong lane to take the tower and start pressuring the map. But when the Ursa refuses to lose the lane, he ends up actually baiting the Phoenix into making a huge mistake. And this is a very, very common mistake for supports to make, which is to add another body to an already losing lane. So the Phoenix ends up TPing bottom, thinking that he needs to help this Ursa. And again, this is a mistake by the Phoenix, but it's caused by the Ursa not leaving this lane. So it's kind of the Ursa's fault, it's kind of the Phoenix's fault, but ultimately it stems from the Ursa continuing to stay in this lane. So Phoenix is now here, and why this is so bad is that he has taken part of the strong lane and brought it to the lane that is losing. But the problem with this rotation from the strong lane to the weak lane is that it isn't enough to tip the balance to be Radiant favored. So in essence, he has made no difference by coming down to this bottom lane, because the Ursa still is not going to have a good lane, even with two heroes here, because the Skywrath Mage and the Magnus have already won this lane. There's no coming back. They're already too farmed. They're going to be able to out-harass the Ursa no matter what. And when the Phoenix comes down here, he now adds a third body to leeching experience from the Ursa, and he encourages the Ursa to continue to stay in this lane. So there's a little bit of psychology going on here as well. The two heroes that we're against don't really care if they suddenly start getting shut down, because by taking a piece of the strong lane and bringing it to the weak lane, we now have effectively made the strong lane weak as well. So now we have two very weak losing lanes, and then we have the mid lane, which is unchanged. So this is really what I mean when I say that you need to learn to lose games correctly, because instead of just losing your lane gracefully, instead of leaving the lane, just conceding that you have a bad matchup and getting as much as you can, you're now losing a lane that you should be winning because you forced the Phoenix to come try and help the losing lane. So now the Wraith King, who is having a pretty good game, is now going to start having a bad game, and the Ursa's bad game remains unchanged. And this seemingly small decision can snowball a game completely out of control, because this is a game where I would probably say the Radiant are favored, as long as they don't just completely feed the game away in the first 25 minutes, because their team fight is just far superior. And even though it's a anti-mage against the Medusa, it's really not that big of a counter anymore. Medusa is just generally the best late game hero, especially when she has the incredible team fight of a Phoenix and a Warlock behind her. And this is the main point of the video. This is something that Jenkins and I have been preaching for a long time, which is that if you are having a bad game, it is because you are choosing to have a bad game. You can always do something to mix it up. You can always do something to shake up what's going on the map. And if you do that, then you will completely counter whatever bad matchup you're in by just not playing into it at all. All this Ursa has to do is leave the lane, and this game is probably a win for the Radiant. So this is really just a PSA to all the carry players out there. If you are in a bad lane, instead of whining to your supports and asking for help, just leave the lane, take the initiative. It's your job to carry the game, and you can actually carry the game by losing the lane and getting your farm elsewhere. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope this helps. Good luck in your games, and we will see you in the next one.